Hello, this is a tutorial video on how to create and use a collab contract for splitting royalties on the Teia NFT marketplace. For this demo, we're going to be using three users up here. On the green tab, we have Alice, who's going to be one of our main core collab artists. On the yellow tab, we have Bob, who's going to be our second artist on the collab contract. In the blue tab, we have just a regular account for collecting the work so that we can see how the royalty splits actually work in practice. And on the last tab here, we have a Tempo wallet already set up with the three addresses for these three users. We have a collector address, Alice, and Bob. So we're going to be sharing this wallet with those three users. So if we switch back to Alice here, the first thing you want to do to create a new collab is to go over, first of course, you sync up your user with the marketplace and then click on the menu item here and click on collaborate. Now, Alice already has a couple of collab contracts, so those will appear listed here. If it's the first time you're setting up a contract, then you will see something like this. You aren't part of any collaborations at the moment. And that's when you want to switch over to the create tab here to create a new contract. But we're going to be doing that over with Alice's account here. So if I click on create, we have the form for creating a new collab. Now, it's important to understand that when you are specifying the stakeholders on a collab, there's two main kinds of stakeholders. There's what we call core collaborators. Those are like normally the artists that actually actively participate on the collab, and you can have as many as you like. And then you have another type which we call beneficiaries, which are typically either some charities or some projects that you want to donate a small amount of the royalties to. We'll look at those in a moment. So in terms of core collaborators, you just have to provide this form with a list of addresses. So there's two ways to do it. Either you just copy one address at a time here. So we're going to switch over to the Tempo wallet and copy Alice's address first. And on this field here, I'm going to paste the address. And it's asking for the shares. We'll look at shares in a moment. But before we do that, let's add a second collaborator here. So add another collaborator. And I'm going to copy Bob's address from the wallet. And I'm going to paste it here. Now, in terms of shares, there's multiple ways to set this up. One way is that, for example, if you're doing a very, very simple, two-way split and you want to split 50-50, well, you could probably come here and just do 50-50, and that's perfectly fine. Okay. Another way is to just do 1-in-1, and that's exactly the same thing, because if you were to do 1-in-1, essentially you are creating a two-way split, and each participant just receives an equal share, which is basically 50% of the overall split. So you can do it either way. I do recommend that you work with percentages at this stage, because when you, as you see, when you add beneficiaries later, it just makes everything a little bit easier. So I would say in this case, for example, we may want to have Alice with 75% and Bob with 25%. But in fact, let's say that if you are predicting that you're going to have a beneficiary with some percentages, you may want to revise this. But the tool will also help you do that, so as we'll see in a moment. Another thing that's important to remind you at this stage is that make sure that you are happy with this before you actually create the contract, because one of the limitations of this first version of the contract is that you cannot change anything once you've created a contract. So make sure you check everything, make sure the addresses are the correct ones, make sure the shares are the ones that everyone expects and everyone agrees to before you actually create the contract. The only way to change it is to actually create a whole new contract from scratch. So there's no way to actually change these ones once you've created a contract. Okay, so be mindful of that. We have our two core collaborators here. So let's click on next. And now is when we look at the second type of stakeholder, what we call the beneficiaries. Now, again, here we're talking about, maybe some dependency, some library that you use, some tool that you use that you want to contribute something back to. It could be an open source project or just a charity of your choice. And there's two ways to do that. You can just add addresses manually. So any Tezos address will be valid here. Or you can also choose from a list of popular projects. Now, currently we only have like 4 projects. The idea later is that we're going to have a list that maybe the community can help to curate. And then you'll have a list of projects to choose from. So currently we only have here these 4, which is the working group that actually created the Collab contract, the processing foundation, 3.js, and the Hikiknang Tezos fountain. So again, these are 3 or 4 examples of beneficiaries that you might want to contribute to. Let's just pick the Collab contract team here. And in this case, again, normally you're talking about, relatively small shares for beneficiaries. Let's say we go with, for example, 5%. And notice that when I select 5%, it automatically recalculates the shares for the remainder core collaborators, okay? You might still want to double check everything, and you'll have a chance to verify everything in the next step anyway, but just give it a glance and make sure that everything is looking okay to you before you commit to it. You can add as many beneficiaries again as you like. So clicking next, then this is where you actually get to revise the actual percentages. So again, you might choose to have different allocation of shares that don't necessarily add up to 100. They don't have to add up to 100 because then the tool will actually calculate what those shares represent in terms of percentage. So this is actually what matters. This is the figure that matters when it comes to percentages. So make sure that this is all looking good to you and that all the participants, especially the core collaborators, are all in agreement that these are the correct shares for this collab contract. Again, you cannot change this once you've actually created a contract. So make sure this looks good to you. So when you're happy with everything, then you can go ahead and create a collaborative contract. That's what's actually going to create the contract on the blockchain. So again, this is the step that you can't undo or change anymore. So let's click on that. This will then invoke the Temple wallet in this case. And again, so this is Alice's account because she's the one that's managing this contract. Be mindful that it does cost a little bit extra to create a contract just because of the additional storage cost of a smart contract. You are not just doing a regular transaction, you're actually creating a smart contract here. So normally that has an additional cost. So just be mindful of that before you actually go ahead and press the confirm button. Okay. So everything here looks good. Alice has just about enough funds to do this, so we'll go ahead and confirm this. So that, of course, will take a couple of seconds to go through to the blockchain. We can check the progress by going to the Temple wallet here and making sure that we are on the right account. And if you switch over to the activity, we will be able to see that, oh, it just got applied. So that was relatively quickly. And it might take still a few seconds for the UI on Teia to pick up the fact that that transaction has in fact been applied. So just be patient, and there you have it. The contract is now being created. So now that we see here that we actually have 3 contracts instead of 2 that we had before. Now, we'll see in a moment how we can rename the contract, because by default you just have the contract address, which is really not very pleasant to look at. So we'll see how we can rename that to have a more meaningful name. And in fact, the way to do that is you actually, as Alice, as the manager of the contract, is the one that is able to do all those things. If we switch over to Bob here, for example, and if we go over to the Collaborate tab, you'll see that now Bob sees a 3rd contract as well. But unlike Alice, Bob doesn't have any tools to manage the contract. Okay, so another thing to be aware of is that only the person that creates the collab contract is able to change anything on the contract. And by change anything, I mean just change the name and description, maybe the logo. Again, you cannot currently change the actual the shares or the participants. So that's something that even Alice cannot change. So the first thing we're going to do now is actually go and sign in to this contract. And once I've pressed signed in, notice that on the top right corner now, we have Alice's address, but now in brackets, we also have the collab contract address. So that means that Alice has kind of just impersonated this collab contract. So in a sense, even though we are using Alice's account, we are actually now pretending to be the collab contract. So that's an important concept to understand, that as Alice can now actually become another user temporarily. And now Alice is actually representing the contract rather than herself. And that means that if she goes to the edit profile, what happens is that Alice is not going to be editing her own profile. She's going to be editing the collab contract profile. Okay, so again, just be aware that this is the way it works right now. So because she is impersonating the contract, any changes that she does under these settings here are going to be affecting the contract rather than her own profile. So for example, here we could say collab 3, for example, and we could say test collab between Alice and Bob. Again, you can also, of course, add a profile picture to the collab like you would do for a normal personal account. You can even add the same kind of profile information, things like link to Twitter and social media. So that is it. But we want now to save the profile. So we click on Save Profile, and as usual, that is going to again bring up the Tempo wallet so that we can submit that information to the blockchain. So again, just check the transaction fees all look good to you, and then click on Confirm. So once again, this is the kind of thing where we have to wait a little bit for the transaction to confirm on the blockchain. You can check on the activity. And I find that sometimes this particular transaction takes a little bit longer to update on the Teia UI. So just be patient and maybe give it 2 or 3 minutes for things to actually update on the website. Okay. So let's just wait for this transaction to complete, and then we can switch over to see how things look like for Bob. Okay, so give it another minute or so. While we wait, so just as a reminder, so currently Bob is signed in as just as himself. Alice is signed in herself, but impersonating the collab contract. So, for example, if she was going to switch over to manage assets, she will not see currently any assets of her own, because again, as you see, she's actually seeing the point of view of the collab, not the point of view of herself as a user. You can always go and exit the collab contract over here, and that means you didn't become Alice again. Okay, so this is just something that's kind of important for you to understand when you are managing these collabs. You are basically pretending to be another user for a while. And here you see that we already have collab 3, and the description is actually showing. So that was actually pretty quick. If I'm to refresh the page on the Bob side here, that should also now reflect. Here we go. We have collab 3 now appearing on under the list of collabs. But again, Bob has no way to sign in as the contract. Only Alice can do that as a manager. Okay, so that's cool. Let's see now. Next thing is actually create an object as the contract. Again, if you exit the collab, you are back to being your own user. So if you go to manage assets, you'll be seeing Alice's profile. If you now want to create an actual object as the collab contract, you have to again go back to the collab contract. So how would you do that normally? So you have to be the manager, you go back to collaborate, and again you have the list of collab contracts. This is where you're going to sign into a collab, or alternatively, if you don't want to do that, and if you just go to the object mint page, when you actually start minting, and you know if you already minted objects, you must have seen this already. You have this minting as Alice option here, which you can change. Now you can change that because you have other contracts, because you are the manager of the contracts. If you are Bob and you try to mint objects, and you have the change button, it says here you aren't part of any collaborations at the moment. Now that's not quite accurate. What it should say is that you are not a manager of any collabs, which means you cannot sign in as a collab contract. That would be perhaps a more accurate way to put it. Of course, Bob is part of the collabs as much as Alice is, but only Alice can actually mint things on behalf of the collab. So here you can always click on change and then select one of the collab contracts to mint something under. So let's select collab 3, the one we just created now. So if you click on sign in, again, now you see that actually the new name of the collab contract appears there in brackets. And we can now start the minting process. So we just go here and say test collab. And we're going to say test collab between Alice and Bob. We can say test collab editions. Let's make 10, keep it at 10%. And let's just upload something here. Okay, so, just a normal kind of minting stuff, and we're going to click on preview. So here's our NFT. Everything looks good. So we're going to mint the object. So that's going to take usual amount of time. Let's wait for the Temple wallet pop-up. This time we need to put the password in, just because I guess it timed out. So let's make sure we select the right account. So here we go, Alice, and normal minting fees, pretty low, which is why we love Tezos. And it should go shortly. So let's keep an eye on the activity. So again, we're looking at Alice's account, and here we have the transaction being sent to the blockchain. Let's wait a minute or so. Oh, and there you go. We actually got the confirmation on the UI before the wallet gave us the feedback. So now we have an object. So again, still as the collab contract, you can now go into manage assets, and you should be able to see a newly minted object under the collab contract. Now, another thing that you'll find out is that if you want to do anything to this object, you'll have to do it under the collab contract as well. So if you want, of course, to swap it, for example, you will have to do it under the collab contract. But before we do that, let me just switch over to Alice for a second so I can show you something else that's important. So let me just exit the collab for now. And now we are kind of back as Alice. So if I go back to manage assets, you'll find that there's nothing under creations. That's because Alice technically has not minted anything. Even though Alice was minting an object, she did it as the collab contract. So it's important to understand that that will not appear here. Where it will appear under collabs, except it doesn't. And this is another important thing to understand, that collab objects do not appear under your collab tab until you have verified them. That's something that's also important to understand, because anyone could add you technically as a core contributor to a collab contract. But we don't want people to start using that as a way to spam, other accounts. So what we did was we are going to ask every participant, every core participant in a collab to manually sign the fact that they approve of that object. So how do they do that? The way to do that is if you go over to the collaborate again, and if you click on collab 3, which is you don't have to sign in as the collab, you just have to go look for the collab and then click on this object. And you see here that it says you are a core participant in this work, but you haven't signed it yet. So again, you don't have to be the manager, you just have to be a participant, and Bob will see a similar thing. So if Bob goes here to collaborate and he sees the collab contract here, he can click on the collab contract. He will be able to see the newly minted object. He can click on it. And again, because Bob has been specified by Alice as a core participant, he will see this message. It's important that Bob signs this if he does indeed agree to participate on a collab or on this particular minting process. Okay, if he does not sign it, his name will not show up on the list of verified artists here. So this is an important step for you to be aware of. You need to assign the actual object if you want to appear as a verified artist, and for that work to actually appear under your collab tab. Okay, so let's do that here first as Alice. So we're going to click on sign work now. So that again, that will bring us the pop-up, and we're going to submit that transaction. Okay, so we're just going to go wait for that to clear on the blockchain. Unfortunately, as you know, currently we have to wait for a transaction to clear before we do a second transaction. The wallet does not support queuing of transactions. It's something that hopefully we'll be able to have in the future. But for now, we just have to make sure that you switch over to activity and wait for this transaction to be applied, like it just happened here, before we try to do a second transaction. So now I'm going to switch over to Bob's account here. And just to make sure, I'm going to unsync and sync again. The fact that I'm sharing the same wallet with two users sometimes creates problems. So I'm going to make sure that I sync up with Bob's account again. Go back to collaborate, collab 3, click on the object, and here we go. The place where we can actually sign this. We click on sign, and we're going to make sure the fees look all right. That's Bob's account. We're going to confirm that. And again, that's been submitted. We switch over to Bob's account and look at activity to make sure that that's going to clear. Now, I also find that signing takes a little time to update on the UI. We'll see how long that will take now. But again, if you see that your transaction for signing has gone through and confirmed on the blockchain, like here, if you don't see that reflected immediately on the UI, don't worry. It just sometimes takes a minute or two for it to update. Oh, but it was actually pretty quick this time around. So you see here now, if you click on this verified link, you can see that both Bob and Alice have both verified. So they both signed this object. And that means that now if you switch over to the manage assets for Bob under collabs, that now appears under his collab tab. And the same thing for Alice. If Alice goes over to the collabs, that should now be reflected here as well. Okay, so that would not appear unless these artists each one verify their own involvement in this collab. Okay, so now that that's done, how do you actually put it for sale? Well, this is where Alice has to do a bit more work, because she has to again sign in as the contract, log in as the contract, and actually do that as the contract, because the contract is basically managing this object, right? So Alice has to go over to collaborate again and sign in under collab 3. So once she signs in again, she becomes collab 3 for a while, and now she can actually go over to that object And because she has assumed that role of Collab 3, now she has the option to do things like swapping. That option would not be there if she hadn't signed in as Collab 3, okay? So we have 10, so let's swap all 10 for 1 Tez each. And we are going to swap that. Here we go, the pop-up. Okay, yeah, gas fees, normal ones. So let's go ahead and confirm that. So we can again check Alice's activity tab. Let's wait for that to come through. While we do that, actually we can switch over to the collector accounts. And again, I'm just going to sync it again, just to make sure that we don't encounter any issues with the connection, and use the collector account. And if we just copy the URL for this object, just a little faster to do that, so we can access the object directly on the collector account, you'll see that it's already now available for sale, which is awesome. And as a collector, you can also, you're encouraged to click on the verified, make sure that all the artists that have been specified on the Collab contract have actually verified this particular object. So that's all looking good. So yeah, let's see what happens. Let's collect this object. So click on collect, and again, sign into the wallet. So everything looking good. We're gonna spend 1 Tez on this plus some fees. So click on confirm. And let's look at the tempo wallets now for the collector activity. So now let's look at that and wait for this to complete. So this is where we actually expect the royalties to start working behind the scenes, and we'll see that there you go. So that's now being confirmed. So the collector has spent 1 Tez on this object. And if we switch over to Alice's account, we should now be able to see, yep, here we go. We have some incoming transaction, because Alice, of course, is one of the core collaborators on that contract. And she got 0.7 Tez, because, of course, she was receiving a lot more than Bob over here, who only received 0.23 Tez. Okay, so that's basically working. And that wraps it up for this Collab contract demo. If you have any issues creating collabs or using them on Teia, then just drop by the Teia Discord server, and you'll find that there's the Collab contract channel there, and there's always going to be folks there willing to help you. And yeah, that's it. Looking forward to seeing your collabs, and good luck.